Zama, good morning to you. I was looking at a piece of copy that A, references your new young son, so congratulations on that. But B, actually says women should stop downplaying themselves and start being assertive, quoting you in that article as well. Is that the case that even now in the 21st century, 20 years into it, the women are still downplaying themselves?
That is the case, unfortunately, Steve. So we have to work hard at implementing programs that really empower women to, one, know that they bring value to business, and for business to understand that when women are at the table, you see better results in terms of net profit reported and also increased return on equity.
Look, there are two types of men who show some form of sexism in the workplace or indeed in any form of life. They're the ones who know they're doing it and the ones who don't know they're doing it. I put myself into the latter case because I'm sure I get things wrong all the time. What should I do? What are the most obvious things that I do that can actually address my inbuilt sexism in the workplace?
I think the first step is being aware that there is a problem that we need to address in terms of some of the gender bias that exists and the societal norms that perpetuate it in the workplace. So I think awareness is the first step. And secondly, men putting their hands up, just like you have done, to be allies and help fight the quest for equality in the workplace. I think it's for men, when they are at these leadership positions, to be very mindful of what does the board of directors look like, and for the board of directors to be very careful about making sure that the executive has sufficient representation from females, and in South Africa across the race spectrum as well. So it's that conscientious intention to want to change the makeup of the C-suites, which is the CFOs, the CEOs and CFOs and so forth, the executive director level, and right down to senior, junior, and middle management.
Zama, I think we're all very disappointed when we saw those projections from the World Economic Forum back in December that was going to take more than 2 centuries to close the gender gap. But you used to think, how can that happen? Then we get a crisis like COVID, and you can see that wide-scale job losses, it impacting women more than men in some scenarios. What do we do on the pay front? Because we were having a very strong conversation at the start of the year about correcting the gap between gender pay. What practical steps can be implemented even in the middle of this crisis?
I think the crisis presents an opportunity for us to really reset, and we mustn't see the crisis in isolation of the gender pay gap issues that existed before, because the pandemic, as you said, has in some cases widened this gender pay gap, and we will see the results of that when the statistical numbers come out later on in the year. But in South Africa, of those 3 million job losses that I've mentioned, that study also then approximates that 2/3 of those were jobs lost by females. So we really need strong reform across a number of spectrums. So we need government to help enforce the legislation that already exists, which I believe South Africa has a very good labor legislation, but where we struggle is the implementation thereof and the monitoring of the results of some of that legislation. If you look at our Department of Labor, they collect stats and companies have to report on what they call the income differential statement, where they employ more than 50 employees. And that is the starting point of that information being public, not just at a macro level, but also being able to zoom in and identify where are these issues so that we can then have policies and implementation plans that respond to where the greatest gender pay gaps exist.
Zama, I want to ask you about work from home, because clearly a lot of employees, a lot of executives are working from the confines of their own home at this point. I'm wondering whether it's better or not for sort of equalising what happens behind the scenes. I know some executives, senior male executives, now happily holding the baby and doing nappy changes while they're on those conference calls, and others, are clearly interrupted by elder children coming into the room and trying to channel them into some other activity. But women constantly doing that behind the scenes too. Is this better or worse, given what's happening? Are men becoming more involved because they're in the home more, or less involved because women are permanently at home and there's no way to disconnect?
I think it's an equalizer in that, take, for example, myself, as Steve mentioned. I'm able to plug into some of the work activities and also attend to my baby at the same time because I don't need to physically be at the office. So it is equalizing the playing field, and that men can also work from home and then also be involved in more of the kind of unpaid care work and taking care of the household because they're confined to the walls of their homes. But South Africa also comes with its own, call it, intricacies in that, you know, access to affordable data is limited. And so that has put a strain on companies, especially SMEs who don't have, you know, budgets for unexpected expenditure, like buying 3G cards and making sure that people have laptops and devices to connect at home. So those are some of the challenges that we're navigating and put a strain on SMEs that are already suffering in terms of having limited, you know, cash reserves at hand.